Thank you for joining us today. My name is Walid Afifi. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Associate Dean in the Division of Social Sciences there. I'm also immediate past president of the National Communication Association. Before starting our conversation today with Dr. Samah Jabr, it is essential to provide an updated report from the ground as it relates to Israel's genocide since October 7th. To date, 31,726 Palestinians have been killed, and 73,792 have been injured by Israeli forces in the past 163 days. Of those, 12,300 of the killed and 8,663 of the injured are children. Roughly 1,000 children in Gaza have suffered the loss of one or both of their legs, often undergoing amputations without anesthesia. Back in December, the UN reported that Gaza had become, quote, the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. Given the vastness of these numbers, let's narrow to the past 3 days. Between the afternoon of March 15th and this morning, March 18th, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza, 236 Palestinians were killed and 358 Palestinians were injured. Of those, 81 were killed and 116 injured in only the past 24 hours. More than 8,000 Palestinians are missing, most presumed dead under the rubble or kidnapped and killed by Israeli forces. The first 10 weeks of the Israel-Gaza war were the deadliest in recorded history for journalists. To date, 134 Palestinian journalists have been killed in Gaza. The World Health Organization has recorded 771 attacks that Israel has conducted against healthcare. 337 healthcare professionals have been killed. Within the first month, Israel had already killed more UN health personnel than any other war on record. And the International Rescue Committee describes Gaza as, quote, the most dangerous place for aid workers in the world. This becomes a theme. I've yet to discuss the forced starvation that Israel has inflicted upon the population of Gaza. According to several agencies, widespread famine is imminent. A report released earlier today by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, IPC, finds that there is not a single person in Gaza classified as having food security. In fact, on their 5-phase scale, nearly the entire population of Gaza is currently facing crisis, phase 3, or worse levels of food insecurity, including 876,000 facing emergency levels of food insecurity, which is phase 4, and 677 facing catastrophic or phase 5 levels of food insecurity. A UN report shows that approximately 1 in every 3 child has acute malnutrition. 10% of children under 2 are in the phase of severe wasting, the most life-threatening form of malnutrition, which puts children at highest risk of medical complications and death unless they receive urgent therapeutic feeding and treatment, which is not available. Shifting to the West Bank, at least 432 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th, including 115 children, and more than 4,650 Palestinians have been injured. As of last month, settler violence has led to the depopulation and forcible transfer of 16 Palestinian communities in the West Bank. More broadly, approximately 300 houses have been demolished, and 1,640 Palestinians have been displaced in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has recorded 650 settler attacks against Palestinians that resulted in death or injury and/or damage to property since October 7th. Across both the West Bank and Gaza, Israeli settlers and soldiers have been subjecting Palestinians to a wide range of humiliation, assault, and torture. A recent report by Amnesty International included this testimony from a Palestinian who was attacked, along with 2 others, on October 12th in Ramallah, very shortly after October 7th. He describes being held and beaten by settlers for 2 hours, after which Israeli military jeep arrived. Quote, one of the Israeli officers who came approached me and kicked me on my left side, then jumped on my head with his 2 legs, pushing my face further into the dirt, and then continued kicking me as I was head down into the dirt with my hands tied behind my back. He then got a knife and tore all my clothes off except for my underwear, used part of my torn clothes to blindfold me. The beating to the rest of my body did not stop. At one point, he started jumping on my back 3 or 4 times while yelling, "Die, die, you trash." In the end, before this finally stopped, another officer urinated on my face and body while also yelling at us to die. So this is a very, very small indication of the current realities facing Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. I now turn to a conversation with Dr. Samah Jabr. Dr. Samah is a psychiatrist practicing in the public and private sectors within Palestine in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. She is currently the head of the mental health unit within the Palestinian Ministry of Health. She has taught both in the classroom and in clinical settings on the faculties of several Palestinian universities, and she's affiliated with George Washington University within the Division of Global Mental Health, where she's currently an associate clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences. She's a trainer of several subjects related to psychiatry and psychotherapy, including CPT, MHGAP, Istanbul Protocol for the Documentation of Torture, and treatment packages for drug addiction. Dr. Jabr often serves as a consultant for international organizations regarding program development, policy planning, and program implementation, and as a provider of psychological support and well-being workshops for human rights organizations. Her varied areas of interest include the rights of prisoners, the problems of stigma, psychoanalysis, childhood trauma, and the integration of mental health with public health. She's a prolific writer on diverse subjects, both academic and public media, related to mental health and human rights. She authored the book Beyond the Front Lines, Derrière les Fronts, chronique d'une psychiatre palestinienne sur occupation, published by PMN in 2017, which appeared in French, Italian, and Spanish, and the book Sumud, published in 2021. She's also an author on several Arab professional manuals and guidebooks. One of them on suicide prevention won the 2021 prize of the Arab Psych Net. Dr. Jabr is also a founding member of the Palestine Global Mental Health Network. We are so fortunate, Dr. Jabr, for you to be joining us today. We're also joined by Dr. Guido Veronese, Associate Professor in Clinical and Community Psychology, University of Milan-Bicocca, Italy, visiting at Gaza Community Mental Health Program, where he teaches family therapy. So Guido and I are going to be doing a lot of the question asking, Dr. Jabr, to get some of your experience on the ground and your professional experience across both the West Bank and Gaza. And we are so fortunate to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much.
One of the first questions that I have is, I guess, can you first start by letting us know sort of where you live in the West Bank and some of the conditions that are the day-to-day conditions of that you live through right now in the West Bank. The reports are that Israel has drastically restricted movement. What is life like right now in the West Bank?
Well, let me thank you first for a very generous introduction, and it's a pleasure to be with you and Dr. Guido and to have this conversation at this difficult time to shed light on all the darkness that is taking place here in the Palestinian territories. I come from Jerusalem. I'm a Jerusalemite, and I work in the West Bank. In my office, my main office is in Ramallah, but I work all through the West Bank, moving from one district to another. And since October the 7th, movement in the West Bank, and especially from Jerusalem to the West Bank and vice versa, became not only very difficult and exhausting, but also very dangerous. So I try to run the majority of my work with minimal movement to spare myself a lot of interaction. But you can imagine that this restriction creates difficulty for people who need healthcare and who have to move from one city to another. A lot of time is being wasted on checkpoints and between cities, and it's dangerous. So this is in terms of how we commute, but also people sense a heavy level of repression and restriction on the ability to express themselves regarding what's taking place in Gaza.
When we were beginning to discuss this event, we were thinking about mental health in the context of genocide. And the title, in fact, is Beyond Survival, the Urgency of Addressing Palestinian Mental Health in Times of Genocide. Can you give us a little bit of a sense for why this conversation right now is essential?
I think this conversation is part of advocacy that is very necessary and possible at this time. In terms of mental health services during genocide, I think there isn't much that we can do, we mental health professionals can do at this time to serve the people who are most in need. I published a letter to the Lancet early on during this predicament, this catastrophe, saying that for years we have trained our staff in Gaza, mental health staff, and other people in the helping profession, like school counselors and doctors, on the integration of mental health in primary health care. And people are trained to implement the MH-GAP, which is a special kit for mental health in primary health care. School counselors are trained to provide low-intensity interventions to school kids. But unfortunately, the complete absence of a safe place, and even a place sometimes, in addition to the severe deprivation in basic needs, makes it impossible to provide mental health interventions. One of my colleagues in Gaza described the efforts of one psychologist to work with a group of children. And then he says, but the children were not attentive to the activity because they were hungry. Also, many of our staff, like the helpers who used to provide support to others, they themselves suffer a lot during this time. I know 4 people who were killed during, 4 people like mental health professionals who were killed during this atrocity. I know them personally, but I think I imagine that the number is bigger than that. And most of the people that I know, they are displaced. They lost their homes. Their homes are demolished. So they lost family members. So the pain is severe for people, and people are still in an emergency situation. And in an emergency situation, when people search for their physical safety, they disconnect from their feelings sometimes. So they cannot really express themselves. And I think that mental health symptoms will surface once they are reassured about their physical safety. We will start hearing more and more psychological complaints, and it will be more possible to intervene.
Thank you, Samah and Walid, to have introduced this very crucial and catastrophic moment of October 7th as events that completely reshaped the community mental health in Palestine, both in Gaza and the West Bank. I want to provide a glimpse about it. The dominant narrative here in Europe is that with October 7th, everything started. While, in my opinion, we have to be careful very much on the antecedent and the determinants of what happened during October 7th. So I would like you, Samah, to provide a glimpse of the context where October 7th happened and the ongoing struggle on maintaining a good individual and community functioning in the Palestinian population, both in the West Bank and Gaza, which are very different contexts, and how this struggle could have led to events such as the October 7th one.
Well, I would say in the ordinary narrative of an ordinary Palestinian, they will tell you that the historical trauma, the predicament of Palestinians has been going on for 100 years, since the Balfour Declaration, which robs Palestinians of their land and makes them a vulnerable community. And then the major events the resistance of the Palestinians against the British mandate, which brought a lot of damage and horrors on the Palestinian people. And then the events of the Nakba, the expulsion of two-thirds of the Palestinian people and taking over two-thirds of historical Palestine. And then the first Intifada and the second Intifada, and the knifing wave, and many events that are remarkable in the Palestinian history that brought a lot of suffering for many individuals and families. But as you know, when we talk about trauma, it's not only the damage to an individual, it's about the connection and the relationships to other people. And I think these traumatic events change how Palestinians perceive their community, Palestinian individuals perceive themselves, and they perceive the world. They change our outlook to the world. Now, over the past few years, the Palestinian cause has been forgotten by the international community, and unfortunately, even in the region and the neighboring Arab regimes. During the Trump administration, they were talking about the deal of the century and the normalization of Arab countries with Israel. And there was also the Arab Spring. All of that made the world forget about the Palestinian plight. And at the same time, what was taking place in Palestine is an expansion of colonial projects. Settlements expanded in the West Bank. Israel was trying to annex the Area C in the West Bank. Settler violence spread all over the Palestinian territories. Gaza was completely forgotten, and in the blind spot of the international community. For 18 years, they've been suffering from siege, closure. I visited Gaza a few years ago, and I wrote an article with the title Gaza, the Betrayed. Because walking in the streets of Gaza, I read statements written to salute people in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, and other statements to mentioning the resistance in Nablus and Jenin. Gaza has not forgotten about other parts in Palestine. Even more recently, when there was an earthquake in Turkey and in Libya, there was the flood in Libya and in Morocco. Gaza and the people of Gaza were collecting money, donations, to support the victims of the earthquake. That's the situation in Gaza. And that's why I feel that Gaza is so betrayed. And this was the situation before October the 7th. And I think the international media and the Israeli official discourse try to portray it in a way that history starts from October the 7th, and to make people believe that Palestinians are the aggressors, and they have implemented the initial violence in our history, and that's very far from truth.
Since uh, um, since 2018, when the Great March of Return started, there was this, like, let me say, I'm not sure if I'm accurate in defining it like that, kind of collective way for healing, which was this weekly demonstration, making people approach the fences, demonstrating. Okay, we can say even that this was led by Hamas, but what I personally witnessed was that there was a real collective, community-oriented way to try to represent the right of return to the Palestinian to their land. So, for example, youth that were dancing Dabka in front of the snipers shooting at them, or kids 9, 10 years old that were saying, we want to go back to our lands, and they were going toward defenses are risking their lives, and the elderly, so three generations together, trying to collectively reprocess this sense of dispossession and go um, uh, back to their land metaphorically throughout this demonstration. So, in a way, I thought of the October 7th as a step forward to this attempt of the Palestinians to go back to their homeland in a way to repair this sense of dispossession and suffering. I'd like to have your opinion about that. Even acknowledging the atrocities that this October 7th then, in a way, created. But yeah, it looked like a way to go back to the dispossessed land, colonized land.
Well, let me give us a brief description of what Gaza looked like before October the 7th. So 18 years of siege, 60% of the people had food insecurity. Poverty and unemployment were above 50%. A 15-year-old child, adolescent, has lived many wars and the March of Return. We can imagine that the repetitive wars affect the development of children. It's not it's not like one single traumatic event with a clear beginning and a clear end. It is a repetition in addition to pervasive adversities under which people live in Gaza. There were multiple efforts made by the people of Gaza to improve their situations. The March of Return is one of them, and it started as, and it was meant to be a collective non-violent demonstrations where everyone can participate to express the Palestinians' desire and aspiration for freedom and for ending the siege. And unfortunately, it was met with violence. It was met with mockery from the international community. I read many newspaper reports saying that those people who have suicidal ideation, it was a suicidal attempt of Palestinians who go to the fence and try to participate in the March of Return. So it was pathologized in a way to minimize the political aspiration of these people and their hopes to change their reality. Two other interesting initiatives were made by people of Gaza, and maybe they are less known to people outside. There was a period of time where the government of Gaza made an amnesty for collaborators. They asked people who used to be informants and collaborators with the Israeli system to come up and talk to the local authorities, and they gave them amnesty. And I think this was a very important step in healing the damaged tissue of the Gaza community. Another interesting one is that, if you remember 2006, 2007, after the Palestinian elections, there were clashes between different Palestinian political fraction, the Fatah and the Hamas people. And a few people died in these deadly and tragic clashes. And the authorities in Gaza encouraged a reconciliation process. So these things are important. We should not underestimate the efforts of people to heal the community. And I think the March of Return was important, not only because it is a form of resistance, it is a way to express the agency and the desire of these people. Unfortunately, all of that was met with ignorance, mockery from the international community, and violence from the Israelis. And finally, we saw the events of September the the 7th, of October the 7th, which show that it proves that there are people who are so motivated to change their reality in Gaza. So I think understanding how the sequence of events in Gaza makes us understand what happened on October the 7th as a continuation for people's efforts to change their political reality, to create transformation in their reality.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jabr. One of the things, and thank you so much for contextualizing the current status in history that's so critical. And it also, your answer, and I know that Dr. Veronese, you also worked on this front, but Dr. Jabr, if you could also reflect on this. The way that Western scholars, Western world thinks of mental health in individualized ways and medicalized ways. I know that you've written about this, and your reference to sort of community and agency, I think, speaks to this in terms of the alternative formulation of how we can think about mental health. So as we think about mental health in the context of genocide, current and after, as we think about the horrors that so many children are going through, adults, children, everyone is going through in Gaza and the West Bank. What would you argue is the need to think about how should we think about mental health, and how might it contrast with the typical ways in which people think about mental health?
Sometimes Western mental health institutions and professionals play a role that is not very different from the Western, the general Western hegemony. And there is a tendency to pathologize people living in political predicament quickly. And I will give a few examples of this. So in a way, they either treat the Palestinians as barbaric and terrorists or as mentally sick people, mentally ill people. I give the example of a sad story of the death of Khadr Adnan, a Palestinian political prisoner who spent a lot of time in prison for repetitive administrative detentions. And many times he initiated a hunger strike and was freed. He gained his liberation through his hunger strike. But last time he was left in his cell without the necessary medical attention, and he died there. So a prominent Israeli journalist said that this guy committed suicide. There is another statement made by Ayelet Shmuel, she's an expert on trauma, and she said that Palestinians are sociopaths. It's easy to pathologize because pathologizing people diminishes the political responsibility towards this population. That happened also during the March of Return. So I will mention, I have many reservations about the hegemony of Western mental health. I will mention a few, using the individual as the measurement unit. And we know when, with massive political trauma and structural violence, it is not only the individual who's affected, but also the society, the fabric of the society, the connections, the relationships, you will see phenomena like internalization of inferiority, internalization of oppression, fascination with the oppressor, and so on. And Western mental health has no interventions that are appropriate to heal the social fabric of people. In Palestine, there was early 2023, the World Bank published a study saying that 70% of people in Gaza and 50% of people in the West Bank suffer from depression. Now, a statement like that suggests, well, it exempts the context and the violence in the Palestinian reality. And they used the WHO 5 questionnaire, the well-being questionnaire, asking people about their, if they feel active, if they sleep well, if they feel joyful. And if you score, if you get a negative score on this questionnaire, they jump to the conclusion that this is depression. But I think that this is ordinary for people living under occupation. This is anhedonia is not necessarily a symptom of depression or negative schizophrenia. Anhedonia, loss of joy, can be a symptom of oppression. The collective aspect is usually ignored. I have a long argument about the diagnosis of PTSD. Palestinians sometimes, in order to make themselves understood to the international communities, they use the categories that the West can understand. They use the diagnosis of PTSD. Many colleagues in Gaza published papers on PTSD among Palestinians, and usually they do their surveys during crisis time, and there is an ethical question about that. But also PTSD best captures the experience of a soldier who goes back to the safety of his home and continues to suffer from imaginary threat, from re-experiencing, from avoidance and hypervigilance. In the Palestinian experience, there is no P, and the threat is very real, and hypervigilance is necessary for survival. So I don't think that the diagnosis of PTSD matches with the Palestinian experience at all. Our trauma is colonial, collective, cross-generational, cumulative, and we need to use our own terminology and description, even if it is not recognized by the West. So those are just a few reservations about the hegemonic Western assumptions in mental health.
So the solutions then, when we think of mental health in the ways that you argue are necessary for the Palestinian context, look different as well, right? So what do the solutions or not, or what is the response? I mean, your conceptual intervention is really, I think, important and really critical for folks to hear, because it suggests, I mean, a lot of things it suggests. First of all, what is the condition of mental health of Palestinians? How to best measure it, and then if in cases where there is mental health deficits, how to then address it.
I think we need to recognize that the pathology is in the context, not in the minds of people. And we need to intervene in the context and correct the oppressive power dynamics in the context, in the Palestinian context. So the interventions will not be, we cannot have every Palestinian on therapy chair and implement trauma-focused CBT, EMDR, and narrative therapy for every individual. I think we need to create our collective tools of interventions, like healing circles, listening circles, and healing processes for groups, especially groups of affected, like there are certain professions who suffered more than others, including doctors and journalists in Gaza. But also we need to change power structure within the environment. And here, advocacy becomes very important for mental health professionals. We need to become advocates for the well-being of the Palestinian people. Solidarity becomes a therapeutic tool. International solidarity with Palestinians tells us that we are seen, that our pain is recognized, acknowledged, and our experience is validated. Resistance of Palestinian people resistance can be therapeutic because it's about expressing of will and agency and refusing to be forced into the corner of helplessness. One of the definitions of trauma is the disaster of helplessness. So for each and every Palestinian to find our little battle that matches with our field of expertise, that matches with our resources, that matches with our personal calculation of risk. I think when we choose our little battle and try to fight it and try to struggle and to do something to change the reality, the small environment around us, this is healthy. It will maintain our well-being and maintain our sanity.
So, Sama, let me go back to some very important and crucial concept or construct that you mentioned before, which is very characterizing the Palestinian social suffering. You mentioned three levels of traumatic experience that, in a way, it seems is connected to a so-called traumatic reality. People are living in a condition that every time is exposing them to potentially traumatic situation and experiences. So you mentioned these three construct and concept: the collective, transgenerational, and cumulative trauma. And I would add, for example, even more the colonial trauma the Palestinian people are enduring. When you enter the West Bank as well as Gaza, every corner of the landscapes, every dimension, vertical dimension of the airspace, the land, and the underground are shaped by the occupation. So people are surrounded by this sense of trauma and violence. And it seems that this is a kind of tool of the colonial occupation, is a way to disrupt those competencies of resistance and resilience that you were mentioned before. So I would ask you, what about the future? The so-called sumud, the endurance, the steadfastness of the Palestinian people is quite proverbial. But what about the future when now, after October the 7th, you see these technologies of the occupation getting so violent and disrupting every way and possibility to resist throughout Sumud in the Palestinian communities. What's your opinion about that?
Well, first, I want to say that we are living in a traumatic context. And I think much of the things that are felt by Palestinians as traumatic are not necessarily considered traumatic by psychiatry textbooks. For example, the demolition of a Palestinian, of the home of one Palestinian, or the burning of the olive grove, or the experiences of humiliation, like forcing a Palestinian to dance to the Israeli national anthem if they want to get toilet paper, or forcing a woman to kiss the Israeli flag if she wants to get sanitary pads. Those are not considered by psychiatry textbooks as experiences of trauma. Yet they can do a lot of psychological damage. We know also that traumatic events do a lot of psychological pain and damage to people, but also there is something called post-traumatic growth and adversity advanced development. And we observe this in the Palestinian experience. Those journalists and doctors and individuals who multiply their efforts, who get energized in the situation of stress and threat, and they try to do their maximum to serve their people. and to express the virtues of the Palestinian society and the Palestinian community, to help others and to care for others. Those are signs of post-traumatic growth. We have our own words, which is sumud. And like trauma, as trauma, because trauma is transgenerational and cross-generational, I believe also that post-traumatic growth and sumud can pass from one generation to another. In the Palestinian oral narrative, we always talk about leaders or individuals or poets or well-known intellectuals who faced the atrocity in a very positive way. We take these people as role model and we try to learn from them and follow their steps. And Palestine is capable of giving us endless examples of these people. I will mention a few. Dr. Amira Al-Assouli at Kamal Nasser Hospital. She entered Gaza during the truce. She had the choice to stay outside, but she came in Gaza to help people. And at a certain moment, when the hospital was being shelled, she took off her jacket and ran to rescue a young man. We saw the Al Jazeera correspondent, Wael Dahdouh, who continued to deliver his work and do what he perceives as his mission to reveal the truth, in spite of being targeted by the Israeli forces. His family was targeted, his home and wife, and his son later on, and his colleague. So people realize that they are targeted, but they try to give an example of positive reaction in the face of trauma. I say this, and at the same time, I want to be careful not to romanticize the Palestinian Sumud, because I know that some people are capable of doing this and many others are not, and that's acceptable. People are different and they have different limits and different vulnerabilities and strength. Also, I want to say that Sumud needs to be nourished by support from outside, by support from within the same society. The Palestinian society is full of virtues that comes from the religious and the national values, like the concept of takaful, which means supporting each other in times of predicament. The concept of ta'atuf, tarahum, compassion. So practicing these things, they are like people in times of crisis, they get grounded in values that come from the nationalistic upbringing or the religious faithful upbringing that can help them in times of difficulty. For those who believe that their family members that they lost in this atrocity, this is not an eternal separation. They will meet them one day in a different place, and they are going to a God who's more merciful than world's rulers. I think that this belief, whether we agree with it or not, it helps people to be grounded and it helps people psychologically. And I keep telling my colleagues, mental health professionals, who are perplexed about what can we do at this time, I tell them, observe. Let us observe what helps people and learn from them. When we learn from them, we can pass this knowledge and wisdom from one community to another, from one group to another, from one person to another. And I'm learning many lessons just by observing how people in Gaza try to survive this difficult time.
Yes, I went through different scholars trying to differentiate in Palestine the concept of resilience, which once again it looks like to be very Western in form, and the concept of resistance, which are in a way maybe overlapping, but I think that they can be even differentiated. Resistance, it's something that again is giving back to the people sense of agency, an active way to try and reverse structures of power that are oppressing them, while resilience is in a way accepting your conditions and instead developing symptoms or illness, you maintain a kind of functioning in a context which is not the most ideal to allow people to continue their life. So, what about the concept of sumud? Do you think is closer to the Western ideas of resilience, which is quite passive, or it's a kind of a ways to shape the Palestinian resistance?
I think it's different than resilience. It includes resilience, but not only resilience. So the Western concept of resilience or adjustment um, entails going back to the coping and going back to the situation before a traumatic event, bouncing back. While in resistance and in sumud, it's about changing power structure. The word sumud was used way before the word resilience became popular in mental health literature. It was used during British Mandate in Palestine. And it was used to express personal qualities, like individual qualities, and collective qualities. It is about a state of mind, but also it is action oriented. It is about surviving, perseverance, and about changing the reality around you. The way I understand resilience in mental health literature, it doesn't entail changing power structure around you. So I think those are some of the differences between sumud, resilience, resistance. Sumud is about action, about changing reality, and it can be collective, not only an individual trait.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jabr. That's such an important and Guido for bringing that sort of bringing this sharp focus on the difference between resilience and sumud, and Dr. Jabr, the way that you answered that. So one of the things that I'd like to, we'll be wrapping up here soon, but one of the things that I wanted to make sure to address, especially given your expertise and your experience, Dr. Jabr, is on the incredibly high levels of torture that are being reported since October 7th. This has always been, torture has always been used, as you've noted, against Palestinians. But there seems to have been a very much an increase on that since October 7th, along with humiliation, along with sexual assault, which we already know that from reports of the children, multiple reports before October 7th, actually, well before October 7th, of the use of sexual violence against detained children, among other Palestinians. So there's a long history of this, but since October 7th, there's been a big ratcheting up of torture, of humiliation, of assault. Can you speak a little bit about what sort of what you've witnessed, or what you think this requires of Palestinians as we move forward in this current condition?
I think experiences of torture are, for me as a mental health professional, one of the most difficult things that we deal with are experiences of torture, helping people who were exposed to torture. And I've been doing this work for many years. And I am a trainer on the Istanbul Protocol. The Istanbul Protocol is an international protocol for the documentation, for the medical and psychological documentation of torture. I trained on using this protocol, and I used to do it with some Israeli doctors and lawyers for an Israeli organization called Pikati. I got a training by the Turkish Human Rights Foundation, and I became a trainer and passed this training on to several Palestinian colleagues. We don't have enough people who are trained to use this protocol. The skills that are necessary to do the documentation are a different set of skills that are required to do treatment for a person who was exposed to torture. They require different skills. Torture has been commonplace. Well, I want to give you an idea about how many Palestinians experienced political detention. Over 20% of the Palestinian people. This is almost percent of the Palestinian male population. They experienced political detention. And torture is commonplace when people experience political detention. Right from the beginning, when they are arrested, several people die during the operation of detaining them. People are detained in a way that is so scary in the middle of the night or very early in the morning at dawn. It's a frightening, horrifying experience for everyone who's there. If family members try to protect that person, they can be shot at very easily. They can be beaten brutally. In the vehicle where they transport them, blindfolded, handcuffed, they are beaten by everybody, beaten with the back of the guns. They sustain physical injuries and bruises. Interrogation is based on many elements of psychological torture, which includes threats to other family members, threatening to rape females in their families, a threat to demolish homes sometimes. Sleep deprivation is commonplace, and it can make people break psychologically very quickly. Deprivation from basic needs, going to the toilet. People are left to soil on themselves, left to pee. They pee, the soldiers or the interrogators pee at the person sometimes. They are beaten on their stomach in a way that induces vomiting. And they are left with their excrement and their vomitus. In my opinion, this is a very well thought of procedure to inflict the utmost psychological pain on those who experience torture. And people suffer from the psychological consequences of torture for so long. Very old reports that were written in the 70s and early 80s describe horrible things in Israel. And then Israel made a committee called Landau Committee to reform their interrogation techniques. And they don't acknowledge that they torture. They say that they use moderate physical pressure. But with this procedure, medical physical pressure, there is a small star, small asterisk, that talks about exceptions. And the exception when there is a ticking bomb. Now, this exception becomes the norm. They use it with everybody. And of course, since October the 7th, torture is not only being committed in interrogation rooms and behind walls. We see it in the streets. Torture is the abuse and harm that is inflicted on a person by an official representative of the state. And when soldiers beat people in the streets this way, this is also torture. So we see it, we observe it. Soldiers film themselves doing this to Palestinians and spread it on media. We don't see everything, but we see enough to imagine the horrors that are taking place. Now, this reality forces us mental health professionals to build more and more capacities in this needed work, the documentation, the psychological and medical documentation of torture. We need to train doctors and psychologists, mental health professionals to do this work. But I tell you, I don't think that Palestinian mental health professionals and doctors alone can meet this need. I think we need to train more Arabic-speaking people to join, to task share this with us, to take part in this kind of work. And we need an umbrella from an organization that is interested in human rights to collect the archives. And this institution, this organization should be backed up by lawyers who will ask the professionals, the mental health and medical professionals who will do the documentation, the difficult questions, so that we can prepare the files to go to the court, maybe the International Court of Justice.
Okay, Samah, I would like to touch, maybe this could be a little bit a turn in our conversation, not talking about just and only the suffering and the so-called pathologies of Palestine, but try to reverse a little bit the perspective and in a way look at some of the collective reactions in the Western people that in a way can be considered quite pathological. I'm referring to kind of a reaction of the bystanders that I mean, in a way we are in a post-media age where everybody has all the means to get informed, to go through the real situation is happening in Gaza. But what you perceive here in the Western mainstream media first, but even then as a common reaction among the population, at least three pathological reactions. The normalization, in a way, okay, you are informed, but days after days you get habituated to these atrocities are happening, and you are distracted by your life first, and this is the best reaction. Most commonly, processes of dehumanization of the Palestinian people, as we really saw quite often, both in the United States and in Israel, and then other reaction such as the denial. This is not true. This is not a real reality. So, in a way, I would like to listen to your opinion about what is happening in the Western society. Why this widespread sense of, refusal to accept what is really happening in this genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population?
Well, I will tell you humbly, I'm not an expert on Western psychology, but I will share with you what I believe is my thoughts on this. Western society continues to use privileges that are derived from colonization. They cannot see, sometimes they cannot see it's easier for them to identify with Israelis. They cannot see the suffering of the victims of colonization. This situation is creating a lot of polarization. The televised genocide is making less room for people to claim that they didn't know. Another element that silences the West, or used to silence the West about what's taking place, is the guilt of the Holocaust. So I think with this televised genocide, people are changing their usual views about who is doing what in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The Western society can easily swallow propaganda like Palestinian Islamic resistance groups are equal to ISIS and Daesh. They can easily swallow the propaganda and the ideology that this is the promised land for the exceptional people, the chosen people. But we know that these are ideologies, not facts. They are not like the gravity. They are ideologies that can be discussed and can be dismantled. And we need to dare and to take advantage of this critical moment in history to question the ideologies that keep the West blind and silent about what's taking place to Palestinians. I see hope in the move made by South Africa, taking Israel to the court with the accusation of genocide. And I hope that this move made by a nation that experienced discrimination and racism and colonialism will encourage many people from the global south, from marginalized groups, many natives, to speak up against the world order and try to shift the political reality. And it will inspire a global pro-Palestinian movement similar to the global anti-apartheid movement.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jabr. We could, Guido and I are talking on the side about, we could spend hours asking you questions and talking to you. I want to acknowledge though the labor that you're taking here, the emotional labor, the time labor, the mental labor, all the labor that we're asking you to do while you're also in the current conditions in which you find yourself, and also trying to do so much daily to uplift the Palestinian experience, and not only just professionally in the ways that you do, but personally in appearances such as this, etc., especially during Ramadan, which is in itself a difficult thing to do. So I want to so appreciate and uplift your willingness to do this and your commitment to do this, and all that you do for Palestinians. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap up, just on the topic of, one of the things that I really appreciated what you said is the idea of observing and learning, and how that is so essential at this time, is to observe and to learn. In fact, we just had an event here at UC Santa Barbara that we put together on teaching Palestine. And so much about teaching Palestine is observing and learning. So I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add.
I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and to thank your audience who are interested to listen to the Palestinian experience. And I want to say that the situation in Palestine should not be normalized. We should continue making a noise about it. We should continue making the effort to educate the world. And this should be the last time Palestinians are exposed to trauma and violence this way. Solidarity with Palestinians should go to the end to change the status quo completely and forever. Thank you very much.